Purple Daily is daily Vikings entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.
I will ride with this group.
Seriously, man. Please.
And away we go.
And that's right, Kevin O'Connell. Away we do go. Chip Scoggins out, but who cares? Because Kevin Seifert, ESPN, is here. It's just like a Star Tribune reunion all the time, Kevin. It's fantastic. I love it.
I love being Chip's backup.
Well, but you're on the show sometimes with Chip, and it's good stuff.
That's true. Very true.
And Chip is like in Europe or something now. I don't know. He's gallivanting around the country.
Yes, he's getting some culture right now.
Yeah, it's very good for him. So you are yourself just fresh back from West Palm Beach, correct?
Correct.
Where the National Football League held its annual March Gala, the meetings, competition committee, all of that good stuff. A lot to talk about, but I want to start you off here. So you talked to Kevin O'Connell as a group with the contingent from here. You talked to KO twice. You talked to Mark Wilf. So after getting access to all of these prominent people, where do we sit on the Vikings quarterback situation? Aaron Rodgers, JJ McCarthy, Joe Flacco. Where do things stand now with probably some clarity?
Yeah, I mean, they really want JJ to be the starter this year. As Kwesi Adofo-Mensah even mentioned last week before we got down there, like that's their hope and expectation and what they're moving towards. But they can't just, call a press conference, put him on a chariot, blow the horns, and announce, JJ McCarthy is the starting quarterback. I mean, that whether you like football, yeah, exactly. Whether you like football or mentality or not, he has to go out and earn it. And so they're not just going to award it to him. But that's the direction they're going in. I think that they're waiting on after the compensatory deadline for having free agent signings counting against your formula for that to pass, which is a couple days after the draft, to beef up their depth because as we all know, they only have JJ McCarthy and Brett Rippon on the roster right now, so they need somebody, and I think that they will do that relatively quickly after the draft. And I think they probably have a decent idea who it's going to be. I will tell you, I don't know. Joe Flacco would make a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons, but I'm not certain where they're going there. And then Aaron Rodgers, I think, has become a break the glass in case of emergency option if catastrophe occurs, which over the past couple of decades, catastrophe has occurred around this franchise. So I don't want to say like it's just some completely unrealistic possibility, but a very unlikely possibility that if JJ McCarthy were to get hurt during OTAs, which are no contact and half speed and very difficult for something like that to happen, or if he were to show that he has regressed to such an extent or is in some case somehow, so overwhelmingly unprepared to go into training camp as the starter of this team, then they would consider breaking the glass if Aaron Rodgers is still available. The Steelers remain an option for him. It's kind of weird that we're now, I think, 2 weeks to the day, almost 2 weeks to the day after he visited there, and there hasn't been a decision as of this very moment, at least. Whether he would still be available if and when the Vikings were to encounter a catastrophe, I don't know. But that would be the scenario in which he would re-enter the realistic conversation.
And it sounded like O'Connell was, to use his term, very intentional in telling you guys that Aaron Rodgers called them, correct?
He did mention that, yeah.
Okay.
He didn't blow the horn and put it on the chariot, I guess. But he mentioned that Aaron Rodgers called and that they had a long-standing relationship, and that he took it as a compliment towards the organization that they are so great with quarterbacks, et cetera, et cetera. But he also, made it clear they had several conversations. He didn't pretend that it was like a, just a being polite conversation. They definitely, and he didn't get into the details of it, but they definitely had, internal discussions that were beyond just like, well, that's nice that he called kind of thing. Right. And so it lasted a few days, and then they decided to move in the direction that they're currently in. And to me, the most important question to ask O'Connell down there, and really anybody who would take the question, is, did any of this conversation with Aaron Rodgers, the continuation of the conversation after the initial phone call at least, reflect any concern whatsoever about JJ? Because that's kind of become a little bit of a narrative, is that, well, there must be something that they are worried about if they're talking. Why would they want to talk to almost 42-year-old quarterback if their 22-year-old quarterback is healed and ready to go? And I asked O'Connell, was there anything, from a physical standpoint, developmental, otherwise, anything at all that is in any way had you concerned enough to consider other options? And he made it as clear and as he could that there was nothing there. That he said two things can be true. We have this 22-year-old quarterback that we've already got a year into the developmental process with, and we think great things about him, and we think he's going to be, the leader of our team for a long time, et cetera, et cetera. And also, the other thing that can be true, independent of all that, is that a four-time MVP and Super Bowl champion calls you and says, "Hey, I love what you guys have, and I want to be part of it." Mm-hmm. And so that's the way he sort of described it, is that, you'd be derelict in not taking it seriously when that phone call comes in, but that it had nothing to do, he said, with any concerns that he has, specifically at least, about JJ McCarthy. It'd be natural to just understand that the guy hasn't thrown an NFL pass that matters, right. That he hasn't even thrown a practice pass during the regular season, let alone during a game. And so there's a lot of unknowns with him, but you got to get there at some point. I mean, would another year as a backup in uniform be that much more beneficial to JJ that you would need to go in that direction? I think only if there's some catastrophic results in these OTA practices.
Yeah, and I think the thing there too is it would be one thing if his contract wasn't so good right now. Like, so if you go through 2 years, now you're to 2 years left and an option year. So like there does, yeah. I don't buy this whole thing of like, well, what the Packers did with Jordan Love might have been right. He didn't deserve to play because they did have a guy in Aaron who was performing great at the time. Right. But that being said, that wouldn't be my organizational philosophy to draft a quarterback first round and then sit him.
And trust me, they get that. Like I had a lot of people pointing out to me, just sort of informal conversations, that be careful with the Packers, like specifically the Packers comparisons, because with Rodgers sat 3 years behind a first ballot Hall of Famer in Brett Favre, and Jordan Love sat 3 years behind a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and that just doesn't exist here unless you introduce it, and they were not going to do that.
Speaking of the great,
not yet.
Yeah, well, and the thing too is, if you're going to decide to detonate the Rodgers bomb, he's going to have to start. Like, that's the weird thing. Like Flacco might have to play, okay, but there's no pressure there. So it's sort of a weird. It's a weird game. If Aaron called and said, "I love your culture, I'd like to back up there," I'm like, okay, we'll talk about that. But he's not calling about that. He's
and he shouldn't.
No, he should either start or just retire. But the Pittsburgh thing intrigues me because I could see a scenario where he decides not to go there, sort of hems and haws about, I think I'm done playing. JJ McCarthy struggles. The world turns on, oh my God, what are the Vikings going to do? They're too good not to have a good quarterback. And then, you've seen it all before.
And it's happened. I mean, I even looked up, I think it was my story, maybe it was your story, in the spring of 2009. The spring of 2009, when Brett Favre had retired from the Jets.
Yes.
And the Vikings were going into like OTAs with Sage Rosenfels and Tavares Jackson and John David Booty. And somebody asked Brad Childress about Favre, and he said something like, well, we talk about everything, but right now we want to really see how Tavares Jackson does and Sage Rosenfels and JD Booty does in these OTAs. And that like caught me off guard, because like that's pretty similar to what they're saying.
Yes.
Right now, at least in terms of like wanting to see JJ, get all the snaps and OTAs that he can possibly get. And so the quotes are very similar, but I think the intents are a little bit different right now.
Onto the potential unknown on Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the GM. So he talked about a week and a half ago now here, but then in Florida, you talked to Mark Wilf. What is your sense on his contractual status here? Because he made it sound like, oh man, I've almost forgotten about my contract. Yeah. That's clearly not the case. So in talking to Mark Wilf, what's your thought process on how this is operating right now?
Well, first of all, I will say, I actually believe that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah doesn't wake up every morning worried about whether he's going to get this contract. He's a different cat, in a lot of ways, and he doesn't. And in some ways, it's really good that he doesn't fall into the trap of the way most people in pro sports think, and they're just because they've been fired many times and they've been hired and they've seen it all around them. And sometimes it's fair and sometimes it's not. And Kwesi, I don't think has ever been fired in the NFL and maybe never fired, period. And he comes from a different, comes from a career of success and just a different mindset that in the corporate world. And so he hasn't really experienced that and to even be as worried about it. So I do actually think that he doesn't go through every day as worried as a lot of other people in pro sports do because they've experienced it so often. But that said, unless Mark Wilf is just telling bold-faced lies, they have had a lot of discussions about Kwesi's contract. They feel very good about where it stands. And I asked him just explicitly, is a contract extension with him something you want to do? And he said, yes, it is. And so if there's anything that they still need to see or they're waiting to evaluate the draft, then that would be kind of silly to be waiting to evaluate the draft because there's not going to be a lot of picks and you're not going to know if those guys work out for a couple years.
Right.
But if there's anything that's holding it up in terms of a hesitation on the part of ownership, he did not indicate that at all. In fact, he said the complete opposite. And so unless he's bold-faced lying about it, which I don't think he is, they want him back. And, it's kind of a subtle difference, but it's a little bit Kwesi's contract is set to expire after the 2026 draft, which is typical for GMs or anybody in sort of the scouting part of football. Kevin O'Connell's contract was going to expire in right after the 2025 season. So there's a little bit of a gap in terms of expirations. And so I think this will probably get wrapped up after the draft at some point before training camp. I'd be really surprised if it doesn't. And it would, unless there was some other hang up that occurred between now and then, but it's tracking that way. And it's really difficult to imagine a scenario in which they're just kind of aimlessly wandering through a $300 million free agent spending spree plus a draft that is, not have volume heavy, but still very important for this team with a GM that they're not sure they're going to keep for much longer.
And I guess off of that too, so O'Connell signed his contract extension, what is it, 2 months ago now, approximately?
Well, yeah, right after the season. So how long has it been since this? Yeah, more than that.
So with that done, did Mark say much? Because it sounds like he downplayed this. Because I think the one question that we all thought was, okay, Kwesi's not signed now. Kevin O'Connell is signed. Yeah. Has the power structure shifted or changed?
Yeah. And we asked that directly as well, and he said there's going to be no change. That they feel that Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski and sort of the rest of the crew work very well together, and he can't think of a time when they haven't been able to come to a consensus on where things stand. So they're kind of there was this period in Vikings history where Spielman was the GM and he was in charge, and the coach was the coach. And even though Mike Zimmer was and Leslie Frazier were good coaches who had strong opinions, it was clear who the alpha in the building was, and that was always Rick Spielman, I think. Maybe you disagree, I don't know, but I think that's where it was at. And I don't want to say they've gone back to a committee system because I don't think that's the case, but the infamous triangle of
That's what I
authority.
heard from
Yeah,
you. Rob's involved again.
Yeah, no.
KO's
No, I'm just kind of paraphrasing what Mark Will said. Like he brought him up
I know.
as well, and so I think that there is a little bit. These are lower key personalities, so it's not quite as edgy, back and forth as there might have been. And so, but I do think that like one way to think of the way Kwesi sort of leads the building is as like a point guard and sort of distributing decisions to the people with the expertise. And so, I'd be very shocked if he ever imposes players on O'Connell that O'Connell and his staff don't want, or that Rob Brzezinski thinks is a terrible cap, salary or contract imposition. Right. And so, there's more of a consensus type leadership going on. And so like, if there were to be a change in the power structure, would it give Kevin O'Connell the right to decide who the draft picks are each time? That it would be pretty extreme. And everything I've been able to glean is that is not the case, that the way they've been doing things, which allows for people to kind of, consume power vacuums in an informal way. I'm not going to deny that, but there's not going to be anything like on paper that says that somebody other than Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has the final personnel power in the organization.
It feels also off of that point too, as far as a potential cooks in the kitchen, Brian Flores defensively, like it feels like they allow the coaches a lot of ability to come in and I don't know if stump is the right word, but basically say this guy fits perfectly. And I will give O'Connell this credit for this, unless I'm completely wrong. He seems to really defer to Brian. Like, if Brian wants a guy, we're going to talk about that. We have certainly seen power structures where a coach might say, I don't like that guy, but the coordinator does. So I find Flores' role here to be, in some ways, Kevin, sort of a co-head coach, certainly head coach defense.
Yeah.
But that's something else that I think is really intriguing about the structure here, is the say that it feels like the coordinator, in that case, at least with Brian Flores, gets.
Well, yeah, and that came up with the case of Isaiah Rodgers, the cornerback they signed with Philadelphia, and O'Connell just kind of explicitly said that's basically a Brian Flores special. Like, he targeted him right away, and free agency, and when he gets a certain tone in his voice, they listen, because it's a track record. Other people that he has advocated for or sort of targeted or found, even if it's going back to like Ivan Pace on the undrafted free agent list. That like he's built up enough of equity there that like you'd have, like, I'm not going to say there's no egos in that building. There is, but you'd have to be like incredibly egotistical and borderline self-destructive to not like tap into that resource. I mean, not every coach is good at that. So tons of coaches come to you and say, oh, we need this guy, we got to get this guy, but like they don't compile the consistent track record that Brian Flores has. So you'd have to, like, even if Kevin O'Connell, and he doesn't, but even if he did like resent, the fact that there's this, that Flores is kind of able to exert that kind of authority, is that, like, it still helps him too. Like it helps the Vikings win games, which is ultimately what Kevin O'Connell is responsible for. So like I view that as like, people, I know there's a lot of people who wonder how Kwesi leads and how Kevin O'Connell leads, maybe to a lesser extent, but like I think that's great that they have a building where, even if it kind of clouds the alpha hierarchy of what's going on, like they have a building where if there's a resource that can help them, it's being tapped into. And so like, I think that's a good thing. And it may be different and feel weird to people who work for other organizations or are watching it from afar. But to me, it has netted results, and that's what you want.
I feel like O'Connell is very good at imposing his will or influence when he deems it necessary, but I don't think he deems it necessary constantly, which is a good thing.
Yeah. And he's also, and that's true. And he also like has so many, like as the head coach, he has so many things, and the play caller that he's got his hands in. Like, I don't think he can't be like sort of the traditional, if this still exists, like CEO coach, where you're just kind of like, everybody's reporting up through you. Like just has a lot of specifics that he deals with that some head coaches don't have to because they're not the primary offensive mind / play caller as he is.
So he talked about at the breakfast the topic of the run game came up. And to be fair, they did run the ball more in 2024 than they had previously. So it was not forgotten. Definitely in the red zone, it struggled big time.
Yeah.
He basically, I thought it was intriguing because I think it's the first time he said this. He basically talked about marrying the run and pass game more now, though, with the addition of Mason. What do you think, or are you buying that we are going to see not just more runs, but actually more effective runs? And to me, Kevin, that last regular season game in Detroit where Darnold was melting down and they couldn't run the ball. Like that's where you got to score touchdowns on the ground. Do you think that that's the game that sort of opened his eyes to, if we can't do this, from like the 5-yard line in, we're going to be sunk. We're not going to beat the Lions or the Rams or anyone in a playoff game.
I think it was the final straw. And also, if you're going to start a first-year quarterback, basically their goal-to-go offense since O'Connell has gotten here has been like these, dropbacks where, the most successful part of it has been these dropbacks where you find Justin Jefferson in the corner or Jordan Addison, or you're running picks or mesh or whatever you're running. They've thrown, I think, more than all but like 5 teams in goal-to-go situations over the past, the first 3 years of the O'Connell regime, and just been unable to run. And it's not just the running backs, like the contact before, the yards before contact and the yards after contact are both terrible. So it's been the blocking and the running backs. And so I think, not only were they not successful with it, but like the last thing you wanted, those are high leverage plays. And like to ask even if he has great targets like Jefferson and Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, to ask JJ McCarthy to be dropping back on 1st and 5, 2nd and 5, first and goal from the 5, that kind of thing. It's too much. And so that's specifically what he, I'd kind of written about this a few weeks ago, and O'Connell mentioned it pretty explicitly in Florida, was that in these goal-to-go situations, they have not been very good. And if a team doesn't have to worry about stacking their defense to stop a big running back, and all they have to do is defend the end zone, there's ways to do that, and we've seen that happen. And when even if you are the greatest schemer of the world and your quarterback can't deliver, as happened in that Lions game, as you mentioned, then you just can't score touchdowns. And so Jordan Mason is a big dude, runs very hard, yards after contact, tops in the league since he got in the league. And so I think like he's not just going to be like a guy who comes in for like 2 series to relieve Aaron Jones. Like I think he's going to be I don't want to tip any fantasy players, but I do think he's going to be in there when they need the crunch yard. First and goal at the 3, 3rd and goal at the 3, in addition to taking a few series off of Aaron Jones.
And Jones in his role is great. Like, he's a great guy, but to make him the primary guy, I think at the end of the day, he gets beat up. So like his size and like I saw O'Connell, said that we don't see how good of a blocker Jones is in pass protection. But I remember one game here, Kevin, where Jones, he threw the block. He got fork lifted up and thrown though. So like he threw the block. He's a tough dude. Yeah. But like you don't want that. He literally was tossed. The defender picked him up and tossed him.
Yeah, and that's going to happen. I suppose that will happen when you're his size. But I think they feel like there's 2 parts of blocking. It's one, knowing who to block. I mean, we can't count how many times we've seen running backs get confused about who they were supposed to get, and they get nobody, and then 2 guys hit the quarterback. And so that's part A. And part B, can you at least credibly get your body in front of these people? And sometimes you might get steamrolled, but as long as you've slowed them down enough to before the throw, you've done your job. And so no, you don't. Like I just think like in general, he just won't be playing as much. Like he played a career high in snaps last year. Like that was, and what O'Connell keeps saying is that, we need a 1A and 1B, and whether that means from a playing time perspective, 60-40, 65-35, 55-45. I think that's what it'll look like. And if Aaron Jones has a game where like he busts up his ribs, and instead of sending him out there in agony, and they'll be able to just take it, take the rest of the day off. Let's let Jordan Mason take it from here.
At the end of the day, too, how much do you think that those last two games impacted the signings? Because it feels like I'll say this. I thought Darnold against the Lions was awful. I thought Darnold against the Rams didn't get any help. Sacked 9 times? Like it does, and this is not a bad thing. I'm not criticizing it, but it does feel like a lot of the moves made to bring in guys last month now are predicated on those two games. And also, I guess, as a whole, the playoffs themselves, because both those lines, from a Vikings perspective, weren't good enough. But you go out and get a guy like Mason, who can, run and bruise guys, your offensive line, your interior defensive line. It does feel like those two games had a huge, huge influence on what the Vikings decided to do.
Yeah, especially I think they tried to, from a defense perspective, I think they tried to address that last year. I think they tried to sign Christian Wilkins and maybe some other guys, and it just didn't work out. But offensively, think about how frustrated O'Connell must have been for him to come out after that Rams game in the playoffs and just blurt out, we have to fix the interior of the line. And because he's 99.9% of the time very much on message, does not ever criticize people in public, and that's fine. He doesn't, not everybody needs to do that. But for him to say that, I think, perked up everyone's antennas. And really, not funny, but the question that came up is why did they spare Blake Brandel? He's the left guard. They swapped out the center, they swapped out the right guard. Right. And so somebody asked him, why, what's with Blake Brandel? Is he still the starting left guard? And he basically said, he had some good times, some good points of last season, some bad points, but we're giving him some grace. But the other thing is you can't necessarily get 3 new starters in those positions all in one off season. So they're going to give him another chance. He's also by far the lowest paid offensive lineman. I mean, they're paying a ton of money to, when you think about the Darisaw extension, I think his average is $26 million a year. Yeah. Then you go with Ryan Kelly. I think he's at $9 million a year. So Will Fries is at $17.5 million a year, or Brian O'Neill's at $18 million a year. And then you have Blake Brandel at $3.5. And so at some point you just can't buy you can't buy that many offensive linemen.
Do Kelly and Darisaw prop Brandel up too?
Yeah, and that, I think our friend Matthew Collar had done a really good piece just showing how Brandel's performance, really dipped noticeably almost immediately after Darisaw's injury. And I'm sure Darisaw helped prop them up, but they're also there were some changes made when Cam Robinson came in, because this guy's in his first week with the team. And so maybe some things that normally the left tackle was asked to do, he didn't. And so O'Connell, said that, and said that there was probably some stress and some other things that got, overwhelmed Brandel a few times in terms of having a new player, playing next to him. And that was at least part to illustrate why not only did he played more poorly in the second half of the season, but why they're going to give him another chance.
Yeah, and Cam was good, but I mean, Darisaw's a top 5 tackle.
And I don't even know if Cam Robinson was that good. He was good for a guy that you get off, for almost nothing in the middle of the season to start at that position.
I think he struggled at the end big time.
Yeah.
But I think he started off, passable, and it got worse. But I mean, if you lose a guy like Darisaw, you're probably screwed to a certain degree because he's so good.
Yeah.
Final thoughts from what you saw, what you heard. Have we not touched on any key topics?
I thought it was. Let me think. We talked quarterbacks, we talked running backs, we talked Kwesi. One thing to keep in mind. We pushed, and a few other people pushed the Vikings people about why they signed so many players who were coming off significant injuries last year.
Yep.
And O'Connell kind of joked and said, like, at this point with our training staff, we're kind of like, no matter who we give them, that, oh, they got it, they'll be good. And so he was joking about it, but also just kind of made me realize that, like, I mean, they basically expect their medical staff to overperform, I guess is the best way to put it. In the old days when you and I first started covering football, it was, if your injured players keep getting injured, like was just the trend. And if you drafted a player who was injured in college, you could expect him to get injured in the pros. And
right.
It's almost like you almost wonder, like, are you like kind of thinking that these guys can play God a little bit? Like, is it realistic, or are you being just kind of overconfident, I guess I could say, or have hubris to think that you have some secret sauce?
Football teams never hubris. Never happens.
Secret sauce when it comes to, like, either preventing injuries or getting guys back on the field quickly enough to not miss games. But like this, Tyler Williams, who's their top medical guy, does, they do have a track record they've built up here in the past 3 years of at least coaxing full seasons from players who don't always give them. When you think of Dalvin Cook in 2022, like, he had never had a 17-game season, and he did that year. There's a few. Aaron Jones, as we mentioned, set his career high in snaps and carries and touches and all that last year, and there's been a few other players as well who have either come back more quickly than expected. Another one was Andrew Van Ginkel, who broke his foot in the playoffs in 2023 and comes back and plays a 17-game season. Jonathan Grenard had some injuries over the course of his time in Houston, has a 17-game season. Harrison Smith is, what is he, like 63 years old right now?
He's never retiring.
And he not only is he's not coming off the field. Like, they get him.
Wants him back every single season until he retires from coaching.
Yes, it appears that way. And so, and with this medical staff, he could become the first 47-year-old safety, I guess. But long story short, like it kind of perked my ears up, and like we hear it so often that I don't necessarily it doesn't always register. But like, there's just like this routine expectation that they can take on players with, I guess, complicated medical histories more confidently than other teams. And it's true that, like, there's no like one way to handle all these things. And like, it's not inevitable that if somebody gets hurt a lot, that they're going to keep getting hurt a lot. It's not inevitable that if somebody suffers injury X, that he has to be gone for this amount of time. Right. But so there's lots of different ways to approach it. And they feel like, while there's still the risk of some of these injured players, that like they feel like they're more equipped to handle it than most. And so we'll see how that works out. Like, they've shown a track record that we should believe they at least that at least is the truth, that how they feel, and we'll see if they're able to continue performing at that level.
As you said to or a question that you asked Kwesi at the press conference here that I thought was spot on too was, it's weird. The prevailing theory is you sign guys that are about 26 out of their first contracts. The Vikings ordinarily do that. They did not here. And it does sort of flip the idea. But I think the difference now is this. I think the problem is that the younger guys coming out of contract one are so expensive and they get so much term comparatively that I wonder if this is flipping a little bit back more towards the veterans who are around 30, because you sign them to shorter contracts, not as much guaranteed. If they're not good, you can, basically ditch them after a year or two, where like what the Patriots paid the kid from Philadelphia. I mean, that's a huge contract. I don't know he's worth that, Kevin.
Yeah, Milton Williams. Like, you could take one Milton Williams, or do you take two Jonathan Allens and Javon Hargraves? I don't know if the numbers exactly match up, but that's part of the way to look at it. And I'll also say, like most teams, as the cap continues to go up, are doing pretty good jobs of signing the good 26-year-old players. And so a lot of times when you get to free agency, there's going to be some deficiency in the real or imagined in the players that are available. And and Kwesi, when I asked him that question, kind of mentioned, like, sometimes you can get, I don't think he used the word discount, but like basically said, like, you can get a value, you can get these guys at value because their value has been diminished by injuries that you believe you can successfully navigate.
Great stuff, sir. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Judd.
All right. See ya. Bye-bye.